This video is about building a wooden shelf, obviously, since it was written in the video title and you could see it in the thumbnail, nothing else. This is the material, a nice little slab of maple, and if it will be a success or not, only future me knows.
Hey, past you, it's future me. It worked, it's finished,
Cool.
hanging on the wall.
So, I guess I still have to build it though.
Good idea.
Full disclaimer at the beginning of the video, it has a sponsored part in it because Bosch sent me some of their new sandpaper grids, which should have an excellent dust extraction performance. And I'll have to show you that and see if that's true. Obviously, when it's time to sand the shelf. The purpose of the shelf will be to hold up this soundbar of my parents relatively low under the TV. With it hanging this low, there's no way you can see underneath it, and because of that, I think I have a pretty simple and clever DIY mounting solution in mind. We'll get to that later and see if it works.
I told you, it worked.
Thanks. My parents want the natural edge nicely rounded over and sanded in the front. That's fine. And as you can see, the depth of the shelf for the soundbar doesn't need to be all that large. However, I'm still trying to get the maximum out of that, and that's mainly determined by the width of the cutter head on my jointer planer, which is about 25 centimeters, because otherwise I have no way of getting this slab flat and parallel. I have a ridiculously large jig for flattening really big pieces, like a tabletop, but I'm not setting this up for this one. So 25 centimeters it is.
Time to torture my table saw a little bit. There seems to be tension in the wood, which is strong enough to clamp onto the riving knife hard enough that you can't move it anymore. Only a wedge can help then to free the piece again. And then you can continue the cut.
Jointing seems necessary. What a difference! And a beautiful piece of wood. Let's do the other side. That's done and looks good. And this is the amount of shavings it created, right from here up to there. The board is nice and flat. Next, let's do the mounting system. I cut a short piece of flat steel, which needs 3 holes. This is 20 millimeters wide, and I make marks 10 millimeters from the edge and centered in the piece. And then another mark in this center, but a little bit further from one edge. And with some deburring, the part is finished. Of course I need 2 of them, so let's do the duplicator trick. The idea of the mounting system is that this metal plate is sunken and screwed into the edge of the shelf, and with this cutout it can then hook into the bolt head of, in my case, an M8 bolt. This is just directly screwed into the wall with an anchor, and that's everything. This line is 3 millimeters away from the top surface. That's where the metal plate will begin. And I now need to first make a hole with a bit that's a bit bigger than the screw head I'm using. In my case, a 50 millimeter Forstner bit. And the hole needs to be so that the edge of the hole is just touching this 3 millimeter line. Now I'm making some more marks. And this angle in between here is a bit more than 60 degrees, about 66, I think. Now this entire material within this section here needs to be removed. I explain why later. You will never regret the investment in good Forstner bits.
I was motivated to remove the material for the metal plates with a chisel for about 2 minutes, but then removed the majority with the router first. And I chose an excellent camera angle where you can perfectly see the dust part of the router and nothing else. But the rest of the material I did remove with a chisel.
Alright, that was some fun chiseling and a good practice. If you look at these surfaces, they are not the nicest ones. The second one I then did off camera, didn't take longer, but the surface is smoother and overall better. So that was a good exercise. Now what's the purpose of this big cutout? When the bowl is installed in the wall, the head needs to be at some distance to the wall so that you can kind of hook the shelf into it. But this will leave a little bit of play and the shelf leaning down. You don't want that, you of course want this to be level. So after this is installed, you need to be able to reach the bolt head to tighten it down all the way. And yeah, that's the reason for this cutout. It's for clearance for an Allen key. Showing it again upside down, when the bolt is installed, you can reach the head with an Allen key and then tighten it by going back and forth. Next is sanding the edges. My parents want some kind of fake natural edge, so I just do something that's not straight and kind of random. And I also have to do something about this defect, make it nice and smooth. I'll do that with the angle grinder and a rough sanding disc and a whole lot of dust collection. That worked pretty well, also with dust collection. Everything that was airborne I think got sucked up. The heavier stuff fell to the ground. And this edge that was straight before now has kind of a twist and curve to it. I think that's quite nice. Next now is sanding the surfaces nice and smooth, and this is also the sponsored part of this video. Bosch sent me some of the new expert line sanding grids or meshes for the random orbit sander, and the special thing about them is they should have up to 4 times better dust collection than their standard discs. And I need to test that. So what I'm doing is I'll sand the bottom side with the standard disc and the top side with the mesh, collect the dust for each pass and then have a result at the end.
Nothing interesting about the sanding itself. I covered the whole surface in pencil marks and sanded them away. The built-in dust bag was everything I did for dust collection, and after every pass I emptied everything that was inside it for comparison later. Then I also took a sample of the dust left on the sanded surface with a piece of tape. After that, I cleaned the whole sander again for the next sandpaper and removed everything left on the workpiece. I did this for every grid and both sandpaper types until the whole surface was nice and smooth.
Sanding is done, the results are on the table, so let's have a quick look. Here we have the 80 grid results, and here it seems like the usual paper performed a lot better than the grid. But the problem with this test is you have to sand exactly the same amount of material to get comparable results. I don't think that was the case here, because I started with the underside, sanding away as much as I thought was necessary. Then I flipped to the top side and immediately noticed there were just too many defects on the surface, and sanding all of them away with this little sander would have taken like 10 passes of the full surface, and no way I would have done that. So I tried to sand the same amount as I did on the underside, removed the dust, and then removed all the defects with a belt sander. And that's also really important to do that with the lowest grid, because all the defects that you don't get with the lowest grid, you will never be able to get with the higher grids. They are just for making the scratch marks tinier and the surface better, but you won't be able to remove any further defects with higher grids. At 120 grid, the mesh seemed to perform better than the standard paper. And that's also the case for the 180 grid and the 240 grid. These results now tell me that these meshes perform better, but there's no way I could say how much better. But maybe the test with the material left on the workpieces tells us a bit more. Here's a clean piece of tape. This is with the normal sandpaper, this is with the sanding mesh. And again, the sanding mesh is obviously a bit better, but I again can't really tell how much better. So is this double the amount of this or triple the amount? That's really difficult to say. But the results with the 120, 180 and 240 grid are consistent. The meshes always perform a bit better. And what's also noticeable is that with the normal paper there are many more bigger dust particles left over. With the meshes it's always just tiny dust particles. Alright, now we know that these sanding meshes from Bosch with particle control are better and more efficient in dust collection, since they can suck all the dust through the mesh. The sanding performance is the same as with their standard discs. What you might also can see, this stays flat and obviously has hook and loop attachment. Unfortunately, they can't change the fact that sanding is boring.
Whatever, let's go on with the project.
Before applying a finish, I wipe the surface with a tag cloth to remove all the dust and then put on 2 coats of an oil finish. It's easy to apply with a brush and the excess can be removed after 15 minutes, leaving a beautiful surface with no drips or similar. For sanding in between coats, I had another idea for the sanding mesh that wasn't part of the sponsoring, but normal sandpaper always gums up relatively quickly, and I wanted to see if the mesh did better or would at least be easier to clean again. You be the judge here. To mount the shelf on the wall, I need to drill the holes level and at the right distance. To do that, I drilled the first hole and screwed a board with the right hole spacing in it to the wall. I could make this then level, and the hole in the board guides the drill bit for the start of the second hole in the wall. Since the M8 bolts I wanted to use have a smooth shank, I needed to cut threads to the whole shank first, which makes for a nice shot, but isn't actually necessary, since normal screws with a washer would work as well, and an Allen key also fits a Torx screw head. Anyway, with the bolts in the wall, I could hang the shelf and screw it tight against the wall. It feels sturdy and can easily hold the hammer drill, so a soundbar should be no problem as well.